everything's grayed out. So let's see. I don't know why I'm not getting.
We are live.
Yeah. Excellent.
How are you doing today, Christy?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm still learning all the things about technology, trying to do this new thing. But actually, I'm doing great. So, yeah. Talking with Marnie. So, this is what we're doing. So, I'm just putting this in my thing, talking to Marnie Blank. Yeah, no, I'm doing really good. It's been a great week. And there's just been a lot of good stuff going on for me. Yesterday was in California. It was, and I live here in Sacramento, which is the capital.
Yeah.
It was Alzheimer's Association Advocacy Day. So I spent the day at the Capitol, and it was my first time doing that, and it was really, really, moving and meaningful for me. So, for anyone who doesn't know my story, both my parents had some form of dementia. My dad had vascular dementia and my mother had Alzheimer's. So we were just talking to different legislators about some proposals that the advocacy arm of the Alzheimer's Association is putting forth. And it's just what was very apparent to me is there's no time to wait on some of these things.
Yeah.
Dementia is a growing disease process, and I think it's what did I learn? It's the third leading cause of death in California. I'm sure that's probably similar to some other places. It's just that it's there's just more and more going on. Yeah, so it's important to keep talking about some of these issues and advocating. So that was good. So it folds into what you and I are talking about, or what are some of the conversations. And I mean, this is why we need to have conversations with our families earlier rather than later about what our priorities are and what we want and at the end of our life and that kind of thing. And
yeah, and how do we want to be remembered, and how can we sort of steer that conversation now? Even in my week, I've been still upstate and, hanging out with my 102-year-old grandmother. And, it's been like a really up and down week in terms of, her ability to be cognizant and present, and then be very weak. And, we got hospice involved this week. And this is something that we also don't talk about a lot in families in terms of like when to bring in hospice. And, I think there are a lot of fears and a lot of misinformation about what hospice means and when it's appropriate to bring people in. And, I always try to encourage people as early as possible. It only helps, it's extra people who are caring and wonderful, who can, they provide nursing and social workers and people who will come and do music therapy. And it's just obviously depends on where you are and what services are provided. But I'm really happy, I don't know that my grandmother is going to die imminently, who knows at 102, right? But to have extra people available and present to answer any questions and are available 24 hours a day by phone is just really incredible for families. And so I think that's just something that we don't talk about a lot. And a lot of people end up, reaching out to hospice, when it's too late, or just in the last final day or two when, there are services that can help both the person who's at the very end and the families and caregivers provide like extra respite care. So
And I do want to acknowledge how hard it is. And I don't know how it has been for you this week and your family to even sort of cross that threshold and say, okay, we're signing the paperwork for a hospice. Because I know for me, it was really an emotional thing. Even though I knew it was the right thing, it was emotional because we know we're all going to die, but hospice is not something you do, 10 years before this is something, it really is end of life care. And so there's this acknowledgement.
Yeah.
This is where we are. It could be a year on hospice and longer. And typically we're looking at 6 months to a year is what I think is typically what hospice agencies sign on for. But it is hard. I also will say, I had a good experience with hospice. I've had some clients who've not, but
Yeah.
they also learned that you can ask for different people from your hospice team. Like if you're not happy with what's going on, you're not there. You may not have a lot of choice depending on where you live, right? Because if you're one place where there's like maybe just one hospice agency, you might be, and this happens a lot in more remote areas or rural areas where there just aren't a lot of services. But by and large, you can ask for a change. You don't have to stick with one particular agency. So it's not like you're assigned to this and this is where you go. I don't know. Do you find it differently where you are, or?
I know. I mean, up here, we're in the real North Country. I mean, the nurse was supposed to come on Monday and got stuck on the hillside and had to be towed out, because there was too much snow and ice, and she didn't make it that day.
Yeah.
She had to come back another day. So,
Yeah.
But I think that, within our family, there are different roles and responsibilities for my grandmother's two boys, my dad and my uncle. And I think that that's something that I know that we wanted to talk about, but, there are people take on different roles within the family. Sometimes a person is more physically present and is, doing the grocery run or, doing the overnights or, just being present as sort of, the person who's the eyes and ears on the ground. And then a lot of times that there's another person who may live farther away and who may, be more virtual and managing the finances or, paying the caregivers if there are professional caregivers involved or, and I think that, it really is important to be having these conversations within families ahead of time about who's doing what and a sense of fairness or, is someone doing more of the financial role and someone doing more of the hands-on? Because otherwise, if you're waiting too long, it can get messy at the end. And same with, talking about hospice, I sort of brought it up to both my dad and my uncle in advance to say, hey, I think that it might be time. Can we have a conversation about it? And, and people have different feelings about acknowledging, just like you're saying, that you're acknowledging that things are closer, maybe not the finality, but closer.
Right.
And everyone feels differently about what that means at the very end.
For sure. And, you bring up another thing that you and I have talked about that we wanted to share with folks is, the different roles that people have. And, I have heard so many different stories and even looking at my family compared to other folks, I guess what I want to say is people will, for the most part, try to show up the way they can. There may be someone in the family who others feel isn't doing enough.
Yeah.
It's, not all of us are built to do hands-on. Not all of us are built to do the emotional piece. Not all of us are built to be there are different things we can do. I've heard people have asked me, how do I can't get my brother or my sister to do their fair share. And what do I do? How do I force them? And it's like, I guess I really have to say, forcing someone to do something they're not interested in doing, capable of doing, it's not how they're built, is not necessarily going to yield the results you're looking for, right? But that doesn't mean they don't care. It doesn't mean it, and you know what? Hey, it could be they don't, right? But that's not always the first assumption. It's like you want to have a recipe for success. And but I agree with you. These are conversations you can have a lot earlier to kind of look at what's it going to be like when mom and dad X, Y, and or mom or dad or grandma or grandpa, talking about what that's going to be like and how other people, what are your attitudes about just, death? Some people don't want to talk about it. Some people don't want to think about it. And it is important to discern that so that you can then figure out where you're going to go. Who's going to be sort of on the team and what are the team roles, because it's hard. And what can happen sometimes are disagreements, right? Oh, we want to do it this way. No, we want to do it this way. That's why I think having family discussions earlier rather than later, you can sort of tease that out before it's a critical situation, right? You don't, that's
Yeah,
not,
you can talk about the what ifs
yeah,
and in like a, let's think about the future instead of we're in it. We need to figure this out, in a moment of crisis where people are overwhelmed and may not be thinking about problem solving in a creative way. Because when you have that time and that space to sort of be like, okay, I can't be physically present for whatever reason. Maybe you're at a different life stage where you have young children or your, full-time career, whatever it is. But if you have that time and space, how can you contribute in a different way? Like, how
right,
can you get creative?
right,
Are
right.
you the one helping set up, their computer and their password manager? Like, how can you do things that and I think to your point, like people may not want to do certain tasks, but they also that might not be their strong suit.
Right.
So let's play into people's strong suits and how can you create a cohesive family unit. One of the things that I do with clients is have these or facilitate these family conversations. Even yesterday, I was working with a family. Parents are healthy in their early 70s, children are late 30s, and they really just wanted to have a conversation about what does the future look like. And this is the perfect time to be doing it when everyone is healthy and everyone, is agreeing to be involved in the conversation. One of the children was a little less comfortable, but they showed up. And that's the point. Like, we all come to it with different feelings about our parents aging or the scenario, but it's a really good sign when everyone's just showing up to the table and being open and honest about where they're at with it.
Yeah, yeah. And the other reason why this is important too is, I mean, none of this is predictable, right? We might be talking about our parent or a grandparent, but any of us we're all vulnerable to some point. And I mean, that was my wake up call, right? Is seeing my parents having a trust and end of life wishes long before we even ever thought about that, right? For them, my brother and my sister, that is. And that was the wake up call to my husband and I. We've got young kids and we don't have any plans. And I could be harmed in a car accident. Disease processes pop up all the time. We just don't know nothing is promised. And so I don't mean that to sound so scary but it's like, it's about values and priorities, what's important, right? So what I've kind of come to realize is what's important to me is I want to make sure that, the things that became apparent to me I want to make sure my kids don't have to pay for my care.
Yeah.
So I need to take care of my money. I don't want my children to have to give up their entire life to care for me. So I need to take care of certain things. I don't want them to worry about what I want. I'm going to tell them this is what I want. This is what is important to me at the end of my life, right? So having put that down, having discussions about that, means there's less of a burden on them should something happen. And listen, it doesn't have to be, as we talked about last time, it doesn't have to be a morbid conversation. It's about priorities, what is important. And that's.
And maybe they don't realize it right now, the gift that you're giving them, but they will. It really is. I know that we've said this before and it's, but it really is the greatest gift is to leave clarity.
Yeah.
You don't need to leave millions of dollars. You just need to leave, an impact, which can be so many different ways in which to leave a legacy. But leaving the gift of clarity, I think, is just so important to not have someone have to make really hard choices in a stressful situation without guidance.
Right.
You don't want to leave people with what ifs or creating that dynamic within, your children's generation of wondering what the right move is or disagreeing about it. And even more so, like to your point about we just don't know what's going to happen. I know that we want to touch on, like every 18-year-old should have some of these documents in place that we've been talking about. You're sending children off to college. they are, an adult in the eyes of, certain,
Yeah.
professions. And
Yeah.
so if something were to happen, you don't, as a parent, necessarily have a right to be at the hospital with them or to make
Yeah.
medical decisions for them if they don't have a healthcare proxy nominating you.
Right. Exactly. It's interesting that because when our son went off to college, it was all of that, right? Yeah, he was 18. We didn't have I think actually at that point we did have some things in place, and he could do some things with his university, had some, here's your contact information kind of thing. This is kind of a different wrinkle, but life has changed a whole lot. When I went away to college, I lived in a residence hall, and there was a
Right.
phone with a dedicated phone number. There was a landline with a dedicated phone number. Had anything, like if I had not, if my parents needed to get in touch with me and they called that number, if I wasn't there, there was a roommate who would answer the phone, right? There would be somebody. We didn't have cell phones. We weren't in the cell phone era, right? But I quickly realized if I called my son on his cell phone and he didn't pick up, I had nobody else to call unless he had given me phone numbers of roommates
Right.
or something, because there's no dedicated landline in these residence halls anymore, right? So it was just interesting. So we have to kind of look at our world and think about it's about sharing some information. It's about who can you call, who can you look to. So it is about sharing information, and it's important to do that. But absolutely, your adult child, they, if they were in an accident, you know, a physician, an emergency room, if there's no documentation or something, they may not be able to share information with you. And so if you don't know what is important to your child, you might not be able to intervene in any way. And that's important to know. And then what about their possessions and anything that they have? Where is that going, and what's happening with that? So it's just, there's a lot to it. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
hard.
I mean,
And it's frightening as a parent to think of those things, I gotta tell you, but
and I think that that's
really
why
to
many
cover it.
people don't have those conversations and don't bring it up, because who wants to think about their children getting into an accident or having,
Right.
having something happen? You don't. But the superstition around, by not having it, it won't happen. It's just not how the world works. And
Well,
so,
exactly. And I certainly have run into that where some people another thing, and you could probably answer this a little bit more, but I have had some clients who their parent felt very reluctant to put in writing which child would do, like even
Mhm.
appointing an executor. Well, I don't know. I don't want anybody to get mad if I pick this one. And the thing is that, you know, it it's okay to it's okay to designate one or two people, or
Yeah.
a neutral party, right? So I will just share with you that my husband and I decided we just have two kids, and they do get along fine. They would work together just fine. But we also didn't want to burden them with, oh, you've got we don't know. We don't know what time of life it'll be for them. So we opted to have a neutral party do a lot of the executor stuff. You pay for that, but it's just a way to take it off of our kid. Everything's 50-50. We're good, but it just took that piece off of them to be able to have someone to step in and help them with the whole process.
Well, it's a really good point, because you're giving someone else a responsibility that's it's hard, it's challenging, and we're not taught how to deal with all the paperwork and logistics after a loss.
Right.
And so, being able to provide your children with that gift to have someone else sort of take charge on that, is really lovely and thoughtful.
Yeah, it's somebody who has fiduciary responsibility. So fiduciary meaning they are making the best interest decision. It's not like going to benefit them in any way. It's benefiting the people that they're working for. So I think that that's
Yeah,
important
and
too. Yeah.
and with two people, with two children, maybe it's easier to be like, one will be healthcare proxy and one will be the power of attorney. And depending on, who those people are and what their strong suits are, that might be a good option. But, I'm working with a woman now whose husband passed, and she's starting to think about, she doesn't have her documents in place. And so we've been talking about it, and she has 6 children, and she is sort of blocked around on who
Really
is going to be
struggling.
those roles, and does not want, like you were saying, like, doesn't want to offend anyone, or
Right.
wants to, like, have fairness. And quite honestly, I'm like, the person who's making those choices, like, that's I wouldn't necessarily want that if I had other, siblings that could make that choice. It totally depends on the relationships, the dynamics, what people are good at. But, getting that role isn't necessarily, you know,
It's not a prize all the time.
not
I
a
gotta
prize.
tell you.
Exactly.
It's not the
It's like a lot of work. Like,
It's like sometimes it's better to be, second place, third place. I
right.
mean, you are not getting the prize when you get all of the responsibility.
Exactly.
And we're recommending you do this early enough, and we don't know 20 years from now, 30
Yes.
years from now what someone else's life circumstance is going to be. So that's why it is, I mean, quite honestly, it's kind of a crapshoot. So, but it's important to make some decisions, because I think allowing people that understanding, but it's hard when there are no decisions. And then there's also just a lot of financial fallout when there are no decisions, right? So I don't know, maybe you could talk a little bit about that, when there's nothing in place and no will and no end of life wishes and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Depending on what's going on with the family, it could have to go to court to put, someone in one of those roles. And that
Mhm.
takes up valuable time and energy and money. And oftentimes these things need to be done in haste. If something is going on and someone's in the hospital and there's no healthcare proxy, or there's no power of attorney, and financial decisions need to be made, the last thing that someone wants to do is have to go to court to get to get the authority to act on their behalf. And so
Yeah.
it's just another reason why, and they might appoint someone who's not right for the role,
Right.
or is not not doing the best interest for the person. And so it really is important, and it gives you the power to decide what is best for you and your family by making these choices ahead of time.
Right.
And, like, the other thing that you were talking about, is that one thing you were really thinking about is how financially you didn't want to be a burden on your children as you and your husband age. And I think that is a really important part of this conversation, which is, are you, making sure that you have long-term care insurance, or life insurance? How are you paying for your care
Right.
as you age?
Right. Right.
And not leaving it to the next generation to sort of figure out.
Right, exactly. I also, so all of these are just really, there's no one answer for everyone. Like, there's not a template that,
No.
everybody has to do it this way. It's every family has their own blend of chaos and calamity, and as I say, but you also have your blend of joy and strength. And so it's really taking some time to look at what those things are. And listen, there may be a lot of family infighting over other things, so it can feel really painful,
Yeah.
and aggravating. And yet, the gift you can give someone is to make some decisions ahead of time. And that doesn't mean that they are set in stone, that they can never be changed. For instance, my parents had put some things in place, and we did change some things because circumstances had changed. My sister was initially going to be the point person, but when they made that document, when they created that document, she was not married yet, and my brother was, so it just made sense that she was going to be their person. And then she got married, had kids, and moved out of state, and I was 5 minutes away. So it didn't make any sense. So we changed some things, no harm, no foul. It was just what made sense at that time. So in other words, what I'm saying is, you know, it's not like you can never change anything.
Yeah, you're working with the information that you have in this moment and what's best for you and your family right now. And that can always change. These are not like set it and forget it documents.
Yeah.
They are they're living, and you can update them. That even happened with a client recently where the parents had outdated powers of attorney and healthcare proxies where they had named one child for both those roles because the other child was underage. And now they were both of age. And so they decided that it was time to update it so that both children had some of the responsibility, that it wasn't just on one of them. And so it is one of those things that, you should be checking on your documents, every couple, 2 to 3 years, just to make sure that things are still the way that you want them to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my sweet spot is really about kind of the social emotional with caregiving and sandwich generation and stuff. But I wanted to ask you, is there like a ballpark figure for some of the costs of doing these things with an attorney, or are you safe doing it over like LegalZoom? What would you say to some of those things?
Yeah, I would say that for basic planning documents, so let's say like a will, and typically when you go to an attorney and you get your will, you'll get your power of attorney and your healthcare directives, and it's sort of like a package deal. And I would say, it usually runs, let's say for a simple one, maybe $2,500. If you're doing a trust, it may be, let's say, like $5,000. And those are sort of rough estimates, and it obviously depends on where in the country you live. There are online tools, and I know that for a lot of people, that sort of money is challenging.
Yeah.
I always recommend having a human look over your documents, especially when you have children involved and there are guardianship things at stake.
Right.
I highly recommend having a human, but if
A
it's
licensed human, somebody
yes,
who's qualified to do the work, because
a
that's the other
licensed
thing.
human.
Not your next door neighbor, right? Not the guy who's, cutting your hair, but,
Yeah, and I think it really is about finding the right attorney who is, meshes with your personality and
Yeah,
that you trust. Trust is such a huge thing. This is a big undertaking, and so
mhm,
making sure that you feel comfortable with who you're choosing to make these, drafting these documents is vitally important. And if you feel off, you can always switch.
right.
I'm not drafting documents, but what I found is that a lot of people will go as far as to find the attorney to get the questionnaire, sort of so that they have all of the information. And people will get stuck on a question or two, and then they just won't complete the document. They
Right.
just sit on their desk for 2 years.
Yeah.
I have, I even, a friend of mine asked me for a recommendation for an attorney. He wanted to make a trust. He spent, thousands of dollars, and it's been 9 months, and he hasn't completed his paperwork.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, it could be as simple as not knowing who would take care of your pets, if
Right.
if there was, no immediate family members, and people will get really emotionally blocked. And so, something that I work with clients is really, how can we go through all of these decisions and questions, make sure that you are comfortable, and that, if there are blocks, that we're working through them, so that when you're getting to the attorney, you're like, I know this, we've already gotten consent from these people, it's all figured out, and then they get drafted.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, so it sounds like people consult you sometimes and ask for recommendations. And I would say, look, asking people, asking family members that you connect with or trust, asking friends or other people for recommendations, because it also can feel like a shot in the dark, right? Like, who do
Oh
I
yeah.
pick? Oh, there's this. And if you're just going for the cost, the amount of money, you might not find the fit that you're looking for. And working with somebody who really you feel some sort of connection to is really important. This is not, yeah, it is important to find those things. So I think recommendations are really good for that.
Oh yeah,
um,
absolutely. If you have friends who have really had a good experience with an attorney or a financial advisor, all of these different roles that are going to help you plan for the future, definitely, be tapping into your community
Yeah.
first. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, this has been really good. I feel like these are the kinds of things that, um, I sort of wish I'd even talked about these things a lot earlier than I did with my family. But I am appreciative that we finally got to the place where we're doing it. And then, yeah, just working with different clients and seeing how some of these things can just weigh us down, and it just really impedes and interferes with the process of care, right? Because then you're not present to just the emotional need that you have to be with this person, or and also to take care of yourself in this process, because it's a lot. So
Yeah, and when you're stressed about not having done the paperwork that you need to do, it's exactly that. You're not present, and it's
mhm.
harder to just like enjoy the now.
Right.
And sometimes when we just actually do the thing that we've been putting off, then it gives a lot more space for just being joyful and present.
Yeah. And the other part of that is we just don't make great decisions when we are stressed out. It's like part of our brain just shuts down, right? We're not totally in our best decision making capacity when we're stressed out.
Yeah.
We are in survival mode sometimes. And so that's why I think these kinds of conversations earlier are important, because yeah, you just don't want to make a decision where it's like a life, it feels, and it is a life or death decision, and you don't have any ability to kind of be uh, thinking with your full brain, because
Yeah.
you're going through all the stuff, all the emotions and all the other things, and it can just feel really crippling, and then it's not a great experience for anyone. And
No.
so,
And
yeah,
I think just like a reminder that, there are a lot of things to figure out, the healthcare proxy, the power of attorney, the will, getting your life and digital life organized, all of these things. And, I know we're talking about a lot of things and it can feel very overwhelming, but it really is progress over perfection. It's
yeah,
taking one step. Like, what is one step? This is
right,
not something that we think that people can or should do in a day. Like, this
right,
is a process. So I think just giving grace that, if you're doing one small task,
yeah.
it's a step in the right direction.
So to sort of, I guess one to do thing might be, after, if you're listening to this and anything is sparking for you, I guess one thing I'd say is, before you start thinking about, and this is what I often recommend, and you tell me what you would recommend. I say start with yourself too, right? Like, this may be a conversation that you want to have with a parent or siblings, um, but in talking about priorities and clarifying values, start with yourself before you enter that conversation with someone else. Get a little clear with yourself. What are things that are important to you? Because when you can think about what's important to you, it's easier to then hear other people who may have a different point of view, right? But just go through the process yourself. Ask yourself the questions that you want to ask someone else. And how does it feel to hear those questions? How does it feel to answer those questions? you know, think about that process, and then you can have more empathy and compassion when you move forward to have those conversations.
I love that advice. I have
Yeah,
mic drop. I have nothing to add to that. I think that is a perfect way of going about it.
great.
Yeah, and these conversations are hard to have with oneself.
Hmm.
And so exactly what you're saying, by starting with you and really getting clear and working through your own fear or your own blocks, because we all have them,
Yeah,
then it makes it easier to be open and vulnerable with our loved ones who we want to act also.
right, right.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, I love these conversations. I am looking forward to some more. You've mentioned digital life. I think that's one we need to definitely cover, because
Definitely.
oh my gosh, that's like everything. And so it's there's so much, and it's overwhelming. And then the conversation about stuff too. Like, that's
Oh,
a
yes.
oh my gosh.
Stuff, digital stuff, physical stuff. We're
Right.
going to have a conversation about stuff.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you. I always enjoy our conversations. This is
Me
great.
too.
I hope it's helpful for anyone who's listening or will listen later at a replay. So that's great.
Agreed. I'll talk to you next week.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.